In the modest city of Kurim in Czech Republic, a man named Edward and his partner had just welcomed a newborn baby into their family in July of 2007. In order to prepare for this new addition, Edward decided to set up a baby monitor in the nursery as that extra layer of reassurance and security, especially them being first-time parents. Baby monitors can pick up signals that are unsecured and sometimes display a feed of a nearby monitor, which thankfully nowadays is less of a problem with increased network security. In 2007, though, not so much. Around 11 a.m. one morning, Edward heard crying on the monitor, and as one does, he went to look at it. Instead of seeing his son on the display, he saw something he never could have imagined. On the monitor was a young, nude boy, hogtied in a dark and dingy location, eating off of the bare floor. Frozen in shock and confusion, he even noticed a woman's hand reaching into the frame to hand the disheveled boy some more food. Once Edward was able to collect himself enough to snap out of the shock, he immediately called the police, who went door to door in search of whatever disturbed individual could do such a thing. At first, the police didn't have much luck because there truly wasn't much to go off of. They didn't know the identity of the boy, and the basement shown on the monitor gave away no clues as to its location. But on July 5th, around 9:30 p.m., police finally located the house. It was here at the home of Klara and Katarina Mauerova where the unraveling of an even more twisted plot began. Klara Mauerova was born on January 30th, 1975, making her 31 years old at the time that this case began. She was born in Kurim, Czechoslovakia, and was the youngest of two older sisters. The family, consisting of 5, including their parents, had good interpersonal relationships, as well as a good relationship with God. Although their entire family was religious, eldest Katarina and youngest Klara were especially so, and really bonded over their faith. Not just in a typical way, but the pair believed that they received spiritual messages and divine powers from God because they were the chosen ones. They would do whatever these messages told them to, no matter how wrong or sometimes even violent they seemed, because they were so determined to earn their spot in heaven by fulfilling their destiny. When they were younger, teachers began to take notice of these delusions of grandeur and would schedule meetings to speak with their parents, but they weren't exactly the type to believe in mental illness and may have very well co-signed the girls' claims. Something is telling me these messages were more likely coming from inside the house, and I'm not talking about the big man upstairs. So without any intervention, their strange behavior continued. As the years went on, Klara had a fairly normal life. She completed a degree in the theory and practice of learning, and she entered into a relationship that would result in the birth of 2 children, Jakub in 1997 and Andre in 1999. She appeared to be well fit for a mother. She was caring and maternal, spending a lot of time with her kids, taking them on vacations and to and from extracurriculars. But outside of that, she was described as weak, gullible, and easily manipulated by those who knew her. Although the relationship with the father of her children was going well at first, behind the scenes she had begun to experience her delusions again and was soon left a single mother because her behavior was becoming all too much for the father. Needing some support during the transition to a single-parent family, she and her children headed off to older sister Katarina's house, despite the sisters drifting apart over the years. But they seemed to pick up right where they left off, and that was in more ways than one. They got along really well, sure. But soon, the delusions ramped up again, and they were convinced that they were destined to complete every task that they received from God. One day, Katarina brings home a 13-year-old girl named Anicka, or Anna, from Norway. Klara was understandably puzzled at first, wondering where this girl came from and why she was there. Katarina explained that she was going to be looking after this girl because she'd recently escaped the dark underworld of sex trafficking and was on the run from her captors. The horrors she had endured had led to PTSD, and she needed a safe and loving environment in which to live out the rest of her childhood. Anna explained having many health problems, including auditory and visual impairment, kidney failure, and leukemia, stating that her prognosis was only about 3 years. Understandably, Klara felt horrible for her and the hand that she had been dealt, accepting her as if she were her own without hesitation. However, when Klara offered to take Anna to all of her supposed hospital visits for her various illnesses, Katarina refused, saying that she was the only one permitted to accompany the girl to her appointments. Klara was soon denied any in-person contact with Anna, with Katarina claiming that she had been checked into a hospital long-term in order to undergo chemotherapy. Klara was allowed to speak on the phone with Anna, but most of the time it was just a one-sided conversation because Anicka was unconscious. She took this as a sign that Anna was just in really bad health, rather than it raising any sort of red flag. One day, texts and emails from an unfamiliar source popped into Klara's inbox, claiming to be Anna's doctor. This doctor ensured that he knew how to cure all of Anna's ills, and Klara, viewing her as a new part of the family, was desperate to do whatever it took to help her. So when this doctor insisted that they needed to meet up in person, she was quick to oblige, and the doctor set up a meeting in his car around midnight. If you couldn't already tell, Klara may not be the sharpest crayon in the box, but it doesn't stop there. Oh, it gets so much worse. When this so-called doctor showed up to the meeting with Anna's supposed medical records and diplomatic passport, that was all it took for Klara to heed his word as gospel. As the two continued communicating through texts and email, the doctor suggested not just any old treatments to cure her ills, but extremely perverted and abusive ones, such as rubbing Anicka all over her body, particularly in the crotch region, to cure her and make her happy. Huh? But alas, Klara carried out these treatments and began focusing so much of her time and attention on Anna that her own sons fell to the wayside. Eventually, she handed them over to her parents as she could no longer be bothered with being an active part of their lives. As Klara and Anna bonded so strongly over time, she began to consider adoption. But the doctor said that that could never happen because Jakub and Andre were just too mean to her and eventually would have to return from their grandparents' house, putting Anna in danger. There's actually no evidence that the boys were ever mean or caused harm to Anna in any way. However, the doctor suggested that Klara cure the boys of their evil spirits with tough love and corporal punishment. From that moment on, any small perceived imperfection in the boy's behavior resulted in beatings from whatever Klara could get her hands on, whether that be her own hands, belts, spoons, you name it. If she felt that their spirits were particularly evil that day, she would lock them up in closets overnight where they were made to kneel for hours on end and use bowls as toilets. She prevented them from interacting with anyone, including each other and other members of the household. The boys' biological father reportedly attempted to get into contact with them at several points throughout the years after breaking things off with their mother, but Klara would claim that they were busy with school and weekend activities a lot of the time. The few times that their father did see them, their physical injuries were hidden by clothing, and they didn't feel like they could confide about what was happening to them to their dad. By August of 2006, the mysterious doctor said that the punishments hadn't done anything to curb the boys' evil behavior, and that they would need to move on to something more extreme. From there, Klara was instructed to take them to a desolate cabin in the woods where they'd pretty much be undetectable. There, they met with Katarina, who brought along with her a man and two women who Klara recognized from her son's former summer camp. It was here where Klara would officially drop her title as mother, as if her actions hadn't already pretty much led her to that point. And over the course of 8 days, all 5 adults took part in locking Jakub and Andre up in small dog kennels and subjecting them to torture. The boys were made to eat and use the bathroom within a space small enough to inhibit them from standing up or moving around much at all, much like they'd been subjected to at home. They weren't allowed to speak, and in fact, duct tape had been placed over their mouths a majority of the time so that they could not scream. Over those 8 days, they were assaulted in various ways, forced to take turns having their heads held underwater in the toilet bowl, getting beaten with bags over their heads, burnt with cigarettes, and even scraped with hot forks. At some point, this torture evolved into straight-up cannibalism, when the women decided to start force-feeding the boys in order to fatten them up, then skinning bits of flesh from their bodies, forcing them to eat themselves and each other. After undergoing such extreme mistreatment, they were returned home, where the boys continued living in squalor and being abused. Oftentimes, in order to enact more abuse against the boys, Anna would make up stories about how they were continuing to behave poorly towards her, which would only result in more punishment. One of the most infuriating facts about this case, besides the obvious, is the fact that they had a routine checkup with their primary care doctor, who actually noticed the boys' wounds, but failed to report them to the proper authorities, claiming that they were typical of everyday child's play. I'm not sure what timeline he's living in where cigarette burns and chunks of missing flesh are considered everyday child's play, but hopefully somebody eventually looked into that. As September rolled around, the mysterious doctor responsible for Anna's care decided that Klara had proven that she could do what it takes to continue with the adoption. Since the adoption process and being Anna's new mother was so gravely important to Klara that it demanded all of her attention, she gave up responsibilities of her sons to Katarina, at least for the time being. Once the process was complete and Anna officially joined the Mauerova family, she was given her very own bedroom, filled with all of the toys she could ever imagine. 4 months later, in January of 2007, Jakub and Andre would return to Klara's care, only to be directly led to a dank, dark cement cellar where they would be constantly observed via baby monitor by Klara from the comfort of her upstairs bedroom. And this is where Edward from the beginning of the story comes into play. Once the signals crossed and Edward contacted the police, they were going door to door in efforts to rescue the poor child from the monitor feed. After knocking on many doors without luck, authorities finally came to the Mauerova household. The boys were found handcuffed together, laying in their own bodily fluids with extensive cuts and scars covering their bodies, showing varying stages of healing over the course of months. They were dangerously dehydrated and in overall horrible condition. Klara and Katarina were swiftly detained before any questions could be posed, with the evidence against them being overwhelmingly damning. During her 6-hour interrogation at the station, Klara admitted that she struggled to control her son's behavior, which led to her to resort to this punishment. Meanwhile, their father sought custody, but faced a 7-month wait to clear his name as an accomplice in the case. Unfortunately, by the time he was cleared, he was denied custody due to unemployment and an inability to provide adequate care. The boys were placed under the supervision of social services, where they received both medical treatment for their physical injuries and psychological support for their emotional trauma. The abuse they endured resulted in lasting psychological effects that impacted their brain development and required ongoing professional care for the rest of their lives. Eventually, their grandparents stepped in to foster them, providing a stable home environment. However, when Anna vanished, it didn't take long for investigators to uncover that she was not who she appeared to be. Rather than simply disappearing, she was actually on the run. Her true identity was Barbara Skrilova, a 33-year-old woman masquerading as a 13-year-old girl. She suffered from hypopituitarism, a condition that prevented her pituitary gland from producing enough growth hormones to complete puberty. To make her ruse even more convincing, she began to starve herself and underwent cosmetic procedures, such as liposuction and breast reduction, to enhance her youthful appearance and to manipulate others into giving her the attention that she craved. Although she had indeed escaped from Norway, her initial story about fleeing a sex trafficking ring was a complete lie. In reality, she had run away from a youth center in Oslo when staff began to question her identity. A graduate of a performing arts academy in Norway, she had used her skills to inflict harm upon others. It was then that she attempted to flee before authorities caught up with her. She automatically played the victim card, saying that she was the one being manipulated. However, she was ultimately determined to be of sound mind, fully aware of her actions during the torture of the 2 young boys. Some have suggested that she may have struggled from histrionic personality disorder, but regardless, they all agreed that she was guilty. As if that weren't strange enough, remember the creepy and mysterious doctor who instructed Klara to rub Anna's body to cure her? That doctor was actually Barbara's father, Joseph, who also happened to be the sect leader of a cult known as the Grail Movement. This movement was based on teachings of Oscar Bernhardt, also known as Abdurrahman, a man who attempted to travel from his home country of Germany to New York City following World War II. It's safe to say that America did not welcome him warmly due to his heritage, and his efforts landed him in prison for 4 years on the Isle of Man, where he had the time to write the Grail message. The Grail message outlines the story of a man who could return to heaven through good deeds he performed on earth. The movement's beliefs emphasized personal growth, acceptance of divine revelations, and a moral life governed by the 3 key laws: the law of gravitation, the law of reciprocal action, and the law of attraction of homogeneous species. Within this framework, the Grail symbolized a means of power transfer, especially during divine reincarnation. While the cult has a relatively small following of about 10,000 members dispersed globally, its influence remains notable, with a few international celebrities becoming members. That all sounds pretty appealing, until you consider that the realities of what went down within this church led to its denunciation by Hitler during the rise of his regime. And that's really saying something. In the 1990s, as Oscar grew older, his daughter overtook leadership, but began to deviate from her father's foundational teachings. This upset a lot of the members, who began breaking off into individual sects across multiple countries such as Nigeria, France, and the United States. Each sect was unrelated to the next, and some of them certainly did not follow the principles outlined. Take, for example, the leader of the sect in Brunei, who was arrested in 2008 for forced labor against his female members, even going as far as working one woman to death during a construction project on the property. He even claimed to have had visions of being Moses' reincarnation. Any of these delusions sound familiar? Well, they certainly attracted one significant character in this story, and that is Katarina. Sure enough, she had been a member the entire time. And not only was she a member, but she was fully aware of Barbara's true identity the whole time. Katarina and Barbara had worked together in the youth center and purposely targeted Klara, knowing how gullible she was to play along. In court, Klara admitted her guilt regarding the torture of her sons, but claimed it was akin to an educational institution. Quote, "I was a teacher, and the boys had one last chance to correct themselves," she stated, justifying locking them in cages where they slept, ate, and defecated. Everything had its justification: beatings, burnings. Everything was done according to the doctor's instructions, end quote, claiming that her maternal instincts had been overridden. All involved were found guilty of abuse and deprivation of personal liberty, with Katarina facing an additional charge for providing false testimony about Barbara's true identity. In the end, Katarina received a 10-year sentence, Klara received 9 years, and Barbara was given 5. The participants of the cabin torture were also sentenced, but they have all since been released on parole. Strikingly, the so-called creepy Dr. Joseph, Barbara's father, never served time. The boys received only 24,000 crowns, or about $1,066 as restitution from their perpetrators, which is really crazy when you think about it. I don't really think you can put a price on righting the wrongs that these boys went through, but it certainly seems like only $1,000 is just about as good as a slap in the face, especially considering that this won't just affect them for the time being, but for the rest of their lives. There's no way these boys are psychologically unchanged after all that they went through. And then when you consider that their father deposited this money into his own bank account with the understanding from the court that it belonged to the boys and he was simply the manager, yet he essentially took all of the money for himself. As if these boys haven't endured unimaginable suffering, lost their family, and now they're being denied fair restitution, which was also stolen by their father. This case serves as a stark reminder that you never truly know what's happening in your own backyard. I want to thank you so much for sitting down and talking some true crime with me today out of the endless options that YouTube has to offer at your fingertips. If you enjoyed this video and you like topics such as true crime, strange occurrences, conspiracy theories, things like that, don't hesitate to hit the like button and subscribe down below, because I'm coming back at you with new videos every single week. So again, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will go ahead and see you in the next one. Bye!